Triyo yo yina. Triya mama mama. Triyo yo yina. Yo 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 ro. Triyo yo yina. Triyo yo ro. Triyo yina. Yo 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 yina. Triya mama mama. Yo yo yina. Just sharing it on two more platforms. Good evening, Kayla Gittel. Good evening, Jane. Good evening, Ruth. Good evening, Marjorie and Dwayne. Good evening, Yaakov James. Okay, we are getting rolling. Last post right there, and we are good to go. Good evening, John. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in Parshas Tazria. We are in the fourth portion of the book of Leviticus. We did Vayikra and Tzav and Shmini, and this week is Tazria. I should mention that we are less than 2 weeks away from Passover. So number one, if you live anywhere within the Bozeman area, you better sign up for the Seder. If you're not at the Seder, I will definitely take it personally. So if you don't care, that's fine. But otherwise, I better see you at the Seder and you better sign up. If you're not in Bozeman, if you're somewhere else and you would like to join a wonderful Chabad Seder, message me after class and I will hook you up and we'll get you into the right community for a wonderful Seder experience. I cannot think of a more important time in Jewish history, at least in Jewish history of my lifetime, that it was important to celebrate our redemption, our exodus, our freedom. And it'll be the greatest message, not just to ourselves, but to the anti-Semites of the world. You know, we live in an era that's very enlightening, that the anti-Semites are both on the right and the left. They found something they have in common. Tucker Carlson and Cenk Unger and the Jew haters, the essential Jew haters on the right and the left, from alle Seiten, from Mehdi Hassan on MSNBC to Candace Owens from the Daily Wire, they found something they have in common. Let's hate the Jews. So my friend Hillel Fold, the great social media guy from Israel, from Bet Shemesh, he wrote today that he loves, no matter how much they hate the Jews, he loves the Jews more. And so his love for Jews is a lot more than their hate. And I think it's an incredible message. So when we're going to celebrate Pesach in 11 days from now, let's remember it's not just about our internal freedom and the experience that we'll have, but it's also an incredible message to the world. We don't back down. Yes, it's not fun. Yes, it's a little scary. Even here in Bozeman, there's a private school in Bozeman called Headwaters. Chaya used to go there, but there's a Jewish kid in Headwaters that had to leave school today and is not going back for the rest of the year because one of the teachers was exposing the most vicious anti-Israel and anti-American, actually it's both, anti-Israel, anti-American, anti-Semitic. And so we'll deal with it. The family will deal with it. The rabbi will deal with it. It'll be dealt with. But the point is, it's real. The hatred and the darkness is real. And you know how you deal with that? You don't hide in your basement. You take your matzahs and you come together as a community and you celebrate your freedom. And with that in mind, we're going to study Torah. Because there's something the anti-Semites can never take from us is our love and our devotion to God and the Torah. So with that in mind,
Are you going to report that to the TV and the newspaper people?
We will deal with it however it's best to be dealt with, but not going into newspapers isn't always the first option. There's a lot of wonderful things you can do before that. Hopefully we'll get the school to shut down, but that would be, you do that strategically with the right people and the right lawyers. But my point is only, we deal with it, and we deal with it proudly as Jews. We don't back down, and we open up your Chumash today. We are going to begin today on page 665. It's a parsha that talks a lot about, it talks about leprosy or tsaras. Now, tsaras is not the medical ailment of leprosy because that is a contagious disease that people get. I think till today, people still get leprosy every once in a while. I don't know what you have to do today to earn leprosy, but tsaras was similar. There were blotches. First, it started on the walls of your house, then on your clothing and your vessels, and eventually on the skin of your body. But there's a very interesting statement here in verse 1 of chapter 13. It says, God spoke to Moses and Aaron saying, if a man has on the skin of his body a white blotch, a creamy blotch, or a bright spot, and it forms a suspected lesion of tsaras on the skin of his body, it should be brought to Aaron the priest or to one of his sons, the priest, for examination. So it's a very interesting teaching specifically regarding tsaras. It's the only impurity that has this rule, and that is you must go to a Kohen, to a priest, to examine it and determine that it's tsaras. So if you touch a dead body, a carcass, a creepy, crawly animal, an insect, you touch it, you become impure. There's rules of how it has to work. When it comes to tsaras, specifically, suddenly, no matter how great the sage is, that may look at it and say, oh, it looks like 100% biblical tsaras. You have the sage with the person goes to the Kohen, and the Kohen, the member of Aaron's family, is the one that brings it about. And the reason is very straightforward. When you're going to excommunicate a Jew from the community, all the way kicked out of the community, he's going into quarantine all alone. You want to make sure, you want to check your heart to make sure that that's not coming from a place of judgmentalism, a place of bias, a place of animosity, a place of disgust that this kind of person would live in the Jewish community. It needs to come from a place of love and healthy determination. So you get a Kohen, a priest, comes from the priestly family of Aaron. Aaron was a man, Isha Chesed, a person of kindness. Kahana Rabbah, it says that, for example, when a Kohen blesses the Jewish people, Amvarech Azama, he makes that Shekichanu v'mitzvaysav v'tzivanu, has commanded us and sanctifies with the commandment, Levarech is Amma Yisrael be'ahava, to bless the Jewish people with love. Not enough to bless the Jewish people. Birkat Kohanim, the priestly blessing has to be with love. So it's a person like that can come and determine and tell someone, I'm really sorry to tell this to you, but based on my assessment and hearing from the sage, we have to excommunicate you. But you know that if a Kohen does that, it's a last resort. He'll find every reason under the sun to make sure this person shouldn't be excommunicated. So the compassion and the empathy and the love that comes from a Kohen is what's needed. Now, so the Kohen does that. Nevertheless, the Talmud tells us in a variety of places of what could bring about a person being punished with tsaras, and there's a whole list of items that a person could technically have for tsaras, including idolatry sometimes, including the cheating. Then, of course, you have the most famous one, which is what? Yeah, the Talmud says, why would a person end up with a tsaras on his body? So the Talmud says in Erechin, speaking negatively is number one, murder. What do you mean murder? You get put to death. But the truth is, sometimes you murder someone and there's no witnesses, so they can't put you to death. Or while you're waiting to be put to death, chapara, and get some tsaras along the way, taking a false oath, adultery, being a very arrogant, disgusting person, stealing, being stingy. So it's a variety of reasons, and the Talmud and the commentators discuss them all. But what I want to discuss today is the primary reason that is spoken about many times in the Torah, which is Lashon Hara, speaking negatively, because it becomes a very, very interesting conversation. If you look at the Hebrew in the verse that we just read on page 664, it says, Adam ki yeh be'or psaro, when a person has on the skin, then it gives a list of all the various blotches. Now, it's fascinating because there's various terms in the Torah for a human being. There's ish, there's enosh. There's different words in Hebrew that represent a person. Adam is the highest term you can give for a human being. It represents the highest human being with the highest functioning faculties. A person that is representative, like you said, the first human being was Adam. He was created by God's handiwork, literally. So if you are called Adam, it means that you're not just a human being, right? A man of flesh, a man or woman of flesh and blood, but you actually are living up to the title of what it means to be a human being, intellectually, emotionally, spiritually. And yet over here, when we're talking about someone that has blotches all over himself, which means he has tsaras, which means he's not necessarily living up to any status. He obviously did some kind of sin to get it. So why would you call him Adam? Why not call him Ish, Enosh? Give him one of the other titles. Why the highest title? That's not the title for a guy that did something obviously super sinful to end up in this place. Yeah. No, Torah doesn't do. Torah is specific. If the Torah says Adam, it's specific. And by the way, it's very much in line with the Rebbe's approach to learning Torah, because the Rebbe was always focused on the details. In other words, Seth, you could be right. That sure, you could just say it's a collective, but the Torah is not like that. The Torah is exact. And if the Torah is exact, why are you referring to this human who maybe doesn't even deserve the title of human as Adam, the highest form of human? So I came across this most incredible, lengthier talk from the Rebbe from the spring of 1981. So it was about 6 months, 7 months before I was born. I was born in December of 81. This was in the spring prior. And I don't know, because I didn't study the whole Torah. I don't want to surprise any of you, but believe it or not, I have a long way to go in Torah study. But I never saw this idea taught anywhere else. So I'm going to assume for a moment, and if I'm corrected later, I'm okay with that, that this is a incredible novel teaching from the Rebbe. As he always had this very unique way of observing Torah law, right? 3,300-year-old law, but in a very unique perspective. And so the Rebbe quotes the Alshich. The Alshich is a great 17th century commentator on the Torah, Moshe Alshich. He was a Kabbalist in Tzfas, a pretty prominent commentator who teaches that Tsaras only is plagued on Jews of a healthier, more superior spiritual status. Contrary to what you would believe, the sins are the same. But which person made the mistake with those sins? Not your average Joe Schmo.
Like a tzaddik.
Oh, so I don't know, tzaddik, but a spiritually intact human being who is pure and complete in the service of God. And he's an Adam, he's living up to the status of being an Adam, of being a real human being who has control of his faculties, and he's intellectually stimulated and emotionally balanced and spiritually phenomenal. And therefore, says the Alshich, if you look tzaras, the furthest tzaras ever goes is to the skin of your body. It starts on the walls of your house and then to the vessels, and eventually the worst case scenario, it's on your skin, external. Right? How come tzaras doesn't plague your kidneys? Because the Torah tells us where it's going to be. You don't die from it. You don't die from tzaras. No, but you don't die from it. So it doesn't plague your vital organs. You don't get tzaras on your heart, on your lungs, on your kidneys, on your brain. It's all external. It's all on your skin. This type of blotch and that type of blotch, but it's all on your skin. And what the Alshich says is that the fact that it plagues your externalities, it only plagues the external part of your body, is because the person that's being punished for speaking negatively is a person that is inherently holy and spiritual and pure, who obviously made a mistake by speaking negatively. He's being punished for it. There are consequences. And that's why because it was an external thing for the person, he wasn't who he really is, it only plagued the external part of his body. That's what the Alshich says. The Rebbe has a little bit of challenge with that. If you can go to the Rambams here and find me Sefer Tahara 1 and 2. It's in that brown set. The Rebbe has a very powerful question about this, right? It's a nice idea what the Alshich says, which is that it only plagues the external part of the body because it's a person who only externally made this mistake, but internally is a wonderful person. But the Rebbe says, I have a problem with that because if you look at the list of sins, right, if you look at Lashon Hara, for example, when you talk about speaking negatively about someone, it says in the same Talmudic tractate of Erchin, it says that someone that speaks Lashon Hara regularly, it's as if he denies God's existence. Kaifer be'ikr. It's a very, very strong term. So hold on. You just told me that a guy that speaks negatively, it's only external, the external parts of their body. And yet the Torah, the Rambam, all the way back to the Talmud discuss someone who's addicted to Lashon Hara, someone who's addicted to evil, negative talk. By the way, Lashon Hara is even true talk. It doesn't have to be a lie, even if you're saying the truth. But if you're constantly gossiping about other people, it's a horrible, horrible attribute. And it's as if you're denying God's existence, because what you're doing to the fabric of society is so bad in the division that you create that it's as if you deny God's existence in creation altogether. So make up your mind, says the Rebbe. You're telling me it's only external, but yet we have such pretty harsh words to say about this person. The Rebbe says, therefore he must say, and that's why I think it's a novel idea from the Rebbe, that there's two types of people who speak Lashon Hara. And I never saw this until this morning. Actually, to be more accurate, early afternoon. There's two types of people that speak Lashon Hara. You have people who have disgusting, and I'm using pretty harsh words because that's what it really is, who have really, really evil, wicked, disgusting, vicious, unhealthy attributes. They're jealous, they hate, they're divisive, and therefore, when they speak Lashon Hara, it's very clear that they're trying to hurt the other person with a viciousness that unfortunately is pretty prominent in society and pretty prevalent in society. But that's one kind of person. And that kind of person, Kaifer be'ikr, he denies God's existence. He's a destroyer of the fabric of society. That person is not going to get tzaras. There's no point. In other words, what memo are they going to get from that? The issue isn't that they spoke negatively. The issue is that they're vicious at their core. They need to change from the inside. Tzaras ain't going to help them. It changes everything, huh? Then you have someone who just doesn't realize, right? They're a pure person. And they simply get caught up either in gossip or they're sharing something and they don't realize that they ended up in a situation that's unhealthy. And they don't mean to be bad. It's not because they have bad attributes. It's not because inherently their character traits are meguna. They don't have nasty attributes. They're good people. They got caught up in the moment. And eventually it could linger. That's why it first ends up on the wall of the house. Because even if you're holy and pure, if you get caught up in the moment, or you get caught up in a story, or you get caught up in a situation, you may not get the memo right away, and you may not stop right away. But at the end of the day, it's all going to be external. It's not going to be in your core, because at your core, you're a good person that has healthy attributes. You ever hear people say that they're rotten to the core? So some people are rotten to the core. Lashon Hara is their way of life. They are divisive figures of animosity and hatred, not just Jew hatred, all types of hatred. They're not kind human beings. Tzaras won't help them. There's nobody home. If you're a kaifer be'ikr, if you deny God's existence, your punishment is worse than tzaras. But if you're a healthy, good, spiritual, pure person who's making a mistake, your punishment will be real. Quarantine ain't fun. Being excommunicated is not fun, but at least it will only be on the external part of your body. It's not going to get any deeper than that.
Well, what does it say about you get the 2 warnings before?
So obviously, that's what I said. They got caught up in the moment or in the situation or in the story. So even though there's kind of these hints coming towards him, and by the way, most of the time they catch it before it hits their body. But if it doesn't, again, we're not saying it's a good thing. Right? Even if you're not intending to speak negatively and you end up doing negative, it's still going to affect you because the way we speak affects who we are. People say, "Oh, I'm just talking." Right? What do they call it once upon a time? It's men's locker room talk. No, it's not. Every word we say needs to be pure, thoughtful, and holy. Or at least not unholy. At least it should be somewhat neutral. But there's a difference between someone who's rotten at the core because they've never worked on their internal attributes to be a better human being, and they lived every day of their life just doing more and more and more and more gossip, than someone who makes a mistake and gets caught up, and still that will only affect their negative, their external aspect of who they are. And it's interesting because if you read the Rambam closely, and that's why I asked Chaya to grab the Rambam, Sefer Tahara. Here we go. Tumas Tzaras. And the end of all the laws of Tzaras in the Rambam, Maimonides in the 12th century. Beautiful words of the Rambam, by the way. If you ever, the laws of purity and impurity are pretty complicated, but this section at the end of the laws of Tzaras in the Rambam are almost poetic, because the Rambam was an incredible writer. So he says like this. I'm going to read it straight from the English, but straight from the halacha. Here we go. He says, here we go. When a person speaks Lashon Hara, the walls of his house change colors. If he repents, the house will be purified. If, however, he persists in his wickedness until the house is destroyed, the leather implements in his house upon which he sits and lies change colors. If he repents, they will be purified. If persists in his wickedness until they are burnt, the clothes he wears change colors. If he repents, they'll be purified. If he persists in his wickedness until they are burnt, his skin undergoes changes and he develops tzaras. This causes him to be isolated and for it to be known that he must remain alone so that he will not be involved in the talk of the wicked, which is folly and lashon hara. If you quarantine someone before they had cell phones and internet, right? Then you have no one to speak lashon hara to. There's no one to talk to. You're excommunicated. But here it gets interesting, even more interesting. The Torah warns about this, stating in Deuteronomy, take care with regard to tzaras blemish. Remember what God your Lord did to Miriam. Now this is what the Torah is implying. Contemplate what happened to the prophetess Miriam. She spoke against her brother. She was older than he was. She had raised him and she had endangered herself to save him from the sea. She did not speak pejoratively of him. She merely erred in equating him with the other prophets. Moses did not object to any of this, as it says in Numbers, and the man Moses was exceedingly humble. Nevertheless, she was immediately punished with tzaras. Certainly an inference can be made with regard to the wicked and foolish men who speak extensively about the great and wondrous matters. Therefore, a person who seeks to structure his course of conduct should distance himself from their gatherings and from speaking to them, from the people that are gossipers, that he will not become caught up in their web of wickedness and foolishness. And he actually says a little bit, if you want a little bit further, he says, this is the path followed by the gathering of wicked fools. In the beginning, they speak excessively about empty matters, about things that don't have any substance. As it says in Ecclesiastes, the talk of a fool is characterized by a multitude of words. They babble. There's people that babble. You don't know people in your life that babble? In Yiddish, they say a ploidert. He says nothing. He spoke for 10 minutes and said absolutely nothing. As a result of this, they come to speak negatively of the righteous, as reflected in the verse in Psalms, may the lying lips be silenced, those who speak with falsehood about righteous men. As a consequence, they'll become accustomed to speaking against the prophets and casting aspersions on their words, and they'll mock his prophets, and this will lead them to deny God's existence entirely. So just from being a babble mouth, just from being a yenta bubba who can't shut up, and all you do all day is talk and talk and talk, it ends up being gossip. It ends up being speaking against prophets, rabbis, sages, etc. And you'll end up speaking against God because you can't shut your stinking mouth. But think of that. The Rambam is saying that really, if you study Tzaras, the fact that there's a whole comparison to Miriam, right? Miriam didn't speak about Moshe because she was a negative person. She thought she was doing something good, and yet she was punished with it. So it's a reminder that what type of person gets tzaras? It's someone who's holy and pure that makes a mistake, and God doesn't want to make sure, He wants to make sure they don't end up with those who deny God's existence. So He saves them from becoming further entrenched in a society of gossip and divisiveness. He gifts them tzaras. Is it hard in the beginning? Of course. Because it's isolation, it's quarantine, it's shame. but it's coming from a place of a gift. God doesn't give that to the wicked, foolish, nonstop gossip because they don't got any hope in this regard. Meaning, of course, they could do tshuva, but it has to be tshuva. It can't be the quarantine alone is not going to save them. The tzaras alone is not going to save them. They have to have their own process of tshuva, which is why in the Rambam, when he talks about how a person should live, he refers to people who are Lashon Hara speakers as people who deny God's existence. But when he actually talks about tzaras, not about Lashon Hara, about the plague of tzaras, he talks about it in the context of Miriam, because there's two types of people. There's the degenerate gossipers, and then there's those who make a mistake, and God gifts them with tzaras to ensure that they don't get any worse off spiritually in the process. Miriam?
Oh, well, no, negative.
Oh, many.
Right.
Shloimis Bas Divri, I mean, in the book of Numbers, the woman whose son ended up, trying the one who complained in he complained he doesn't have a plot in the land of Israel because his mother was Jewish and his father wasn't, and he wasn't having tribal lineage. And his mother was Shloimis Bas Divri. Her name was Shloimis because she used to say shalom to every person. She was very outgoing to an extreme. She loved talking to everybody. And so it didn't end up in good results for her. But there's other examples. I'm not thinking of other ones offhand. So what the Rebbe is saying in this is phenomenal. I mean, for me, listen, I only tell you how it feels to me. This talk from 1981 is so powerful because sometimes we wonder, like, tzaras, I mean, isolation, quarantine, the walls of the house, the clothing, the leather beds and chairs, and then then the clothing, then the person's body. Really? I mean, just the most evil gossiper on earth, some divisive figure, that's going to solve it? Wouldn't that make them more angry? What do you think? They're going to go for 2 weeks into quarantine or a week into quarantine? They're going to come back and suddenly solve? No. Now it makes sense to me because the person that's going into quarantine is a good person, a pure person, a holy person, a righteous person who has made a genuine mistake, and it can come from different directions, but they made some kind of mistake that led them to think that this kind of speaking was okay. And God needs to knock them into shape because he doesn't want them to join the bandwagon of the evildoers. So it's a saving grace for people that are good. So it always boils back to the same idea in Judaism. No, that God punishes the righteous more than the good, more than the evil people. The evil people will go straight, they'll be punished in hell, in purgatory. Righteous people in this world pay a bigger price because God holds them more accountable and God wants them to succeed. So he gives them more to deal with. But there's one more vort I want to share with you that I couldn't resist because somebody in New York asked me this week to help them prepare a bas mitzvah speech, a bat mitzvah speech for their daughter. I didn't have a lot of time. We're in major Pesach mode, but he's a good friend and he's a supporter of the Chabad House. I said, you know what? I'll knock something out for you. So Monday morning at 4:00. So before 2-3 hours before sunrise, I took out my laptop and I took out a couple of Sfarim to look for a precious idea about the Parsha, and I found one. Remember a couple of weeks ago, I told you about the Reb Shaul Alter, the great Rosh Yeshiva of the Geri Yeshiva, a brilliant Torah scholar, a man with real kindness, sensitivity, someone who I admire a lot. He's the head of the Yeshiva Sfas Emes. He's an amazing guy, but he says something very interesting. He says that if you look at later in the Parsha, if you look at the process of how how someone who gets tzaras, how they become pure, so obviously the kohen has to inspect them, make sure the blotches went away, and they have to immerse themselves in a mikveh, and then they bring offerings to the temple, right? And when they bring offerings to the temple, let me see if I can find the verse here. Might be a next parsha. Yeah, next parsha. It's the beginning of next parsha. It says, after they bring all these various offerings, it says right here, the priest should take some of the blood of the guilt offering, and the priest should place it above the cartilage of the right ear of the person being cleansed, and on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot. So the kohen sprinkles some of the blood on his ear, his right hand, his thumb, and his big toe. Now, how do you do that? There's a big challenge. How do you do? The guy's impure. Until the offering process is all done, he's impure, which means he can't walk into the temple courtyard. but the offerings are being slaughtered in the temple courtyard. So this Mitzayra, this Jew who had Tzaras, he's trying to rectify, right? He has to bring his whole repentance process. He comes to the temple area, but he can't go into the temple mount, to the courtyard, because he's impure, but yet the Kohen has to sprinkle the blood on him as part of the purification process. So how does it work? So the Gemara says, this is not, I didn't get to the Rosh Yeshiva's teaching yet, this is just the Gemara. This is the Gemara in Menachos. I'm sorry, the Gemara in Pesachim. There was a gate, there was a big gate, a door entrance to the Temple Mount. It was called Shar Nicanor. The Nicanor gate. There's a famous story. Actually, we have kids' books on the story. Nicanor was a Gentile from Alexandria, Egypt. And he wanted to donate this incredible copper door to the Temple Mount. And they went on a ship from Alexandria to Israel, down the coast. And the boat started, there was a big storm came and the boat started, capsizing. And so the people on the boat threw one of the doors into the water to sort of, and then they were going to throw the second one in. And he said, don't. If you're going to throw the other door in, I'm going to go in with it too. So they didn't, and a miracle happened, and the waters calmed. And when they got to Israel, not only did they have the one door, but the other door had pulled up at the shore in Israel as well. And they took those doors and they put it at one of the entrances to the Temple Mount, and it was called Shar Nicanor, named for this Gentile who donated the door. So the Talmud in Pesachim, page 85, says, why was the door of Nicanor not sanctified as a holy place? It was an entrance to the Temple Mount, but it wasn't sanctified and purified, so that when the Mitzayra, says the Talmud, comes to get his thumb and his toe and his ear put with blood, he could stand by under Shar Nicanor, under the great arch of the Nicanor gate, and the Kohen, he could stick his toe and his thumb in, because his body's not in, just part of it, and the Kohen could put the blood on him. But he could stand by the gate because the gate wasn't sanctified. So Tosfos, the commentators on the Talmud, ask a simple question. Just like he could stand under the gate of Nicanor and put his thumb and toe and ear for the Kohen to do that, why couldn't they sanctify the Nicanor gate? And then he could stand outside the Nicanor gate, and the Kohen stands in the Nicanor gate and gives him the blood while he's outside the Nicanor gate. It's only a matter of a few feet. So why would you not sanctify the entire door? Because one day a Mitzayra will show up with his tzaras and need to get the blood sprinkled. Let him stand outside. So there's two answers in Tosfos. The first one is a more complicated one about the purity process, but what really, really spoke to me was the second answer in Tosfos. Rabbeinu Tam. Rabbeinu Tam says, you want to know why. Rabbeinu Tam is Rashi's grandson. Remember, we just spoke about that. You want to know why we didn't sanctify the Nicanor gate? You're right. The Mitzayra, the person with Tzaras, could stand a few feet out, and the Kohen could go into. He says, because if he would have to stand outside, what if it's raining in the winter? What if it's sunny in the summer? He's going to be standing under the baking sun or under the rain. The Kohen's going to be under the arch of the Nicanor door, and he's going to be getting wet or uncomfortable. So in order that the person that had Tzaras should not be uncomfortable from the rain or from the sun, he stands under the Nicanor gate, and the Kohen comes from the courtyard and brings it to him. Imagine, says, so here's Reb Shaul Alpert here, the Rosh Yeshiva kicks in. He goes, think about it. A person who has Tzaras is because he did something really wrong. He didn't end up with Tzaras. He could be a good person, but he did something that was deserving of quarantine. And yet, the Torah is teaching us an incredible teaching of sensitivity. Just because a guy sinned doesn't mean we don't take into consideration his comfortability. The rain not being on him, the sun not baking on him. He's a Jew who made a mistake. Don't jump to judgmentalism. Don't say, well, you did it. Eat what you've created, right? Eat, sleep, whatever, all those fancy statements. We don't say that. We say, oh my gosh, so what? He's a brother who made a mistake. He's a sister that she made a mistake. And therefore what? We should let them suffer just because we can? No. Tosfos is teaching us an incredible teaching that we believe in the power of transformation. And if someone is in the process of changing their lives, in the middle of bringing their offerings, they did the quarantine already, now you need to allow them to transform their lives without making them feel like a second-class citizen or worse, and give them the love and decency and sensitivity that we would want if we were going through a process like that they deserve. because they're created in the image of God, huh?
It's kind of like a gear.
Yeah. Well,
Sensitivity.
sensitive. Well, Torah is very sensitive. The fact that you find Jews that aren't sensitive, it's the most opposing view. In other words, it's polar opposite of the Torah's view. The Torah is the most empathetic and sensitive book on planet Earth. It doesn't mean it's not strict with structure, but it never lacks sensitivity and empathy. Because there can't be empathy and sensitivity that's outside of God. If you think you're empathetic to someone that God isn't empathetic to, it's not empathy, it's distortion of reality. So by following God's Torah, that is the greatest form of empathy and sensitivity, and we see that here. But he goes even further, the Rosh Yeshiva. And then we'll wrap up with that because it's really powerful. He says, it makes sense, because who is Nicanor? Right? I just told you, Nicanor is the guy who threatened to jump off the boat, right? Because he believed so strongly in transformation. He believed that you could bring doors that were created in the depraved society of Alexandria, Egypt, an immoral, unethical, depraved, maybe even disgusting society, but he believed that with the right effort and the right investment, you can take that and turn it into the doors for the temple of God. So he was the ultimate believer that transformation from unholiness to holiness is possible. And if you put in the effort, it's not only possible, it's probable. You'll succeed. And therefore, he merited that under his gate, under his doors, under the arch of his doors that he brought to the temple, is where we were able to live with that idea that transformation is possible by giving the Jew who was having a tsaras episode the opportunity to do tshuva and come back and to do it comfortably without torturing them in the sun or the rain. So it's an incredible lesson in sensitivity and understanding that just because someone makes a mistake doesn't mean they have to be punished the rest of their life for it. There is room for growth, there's room for progress, and there's room for transformation. And we should be the ones that understand it better than anyone else. And why am I saying that? Because, the Torah is very clear about how we have to deal with Jew haters. We have to stand strong. We have to knock it out of the park. There is no room in society for us to accept Jew hatred as acceptable. But we should never, ever lose our empathy and sensitivity. If we turn into the social media monsters that our enemies are, we've become them. Doesn't mean it. Again, Torah, we are Jews of the Torah. The Torah tells us what's right and wrong. That's not up for negotiation. The Torah tells us when you fight a war, you have to fight a war and get rid of anyone that's a potential enemy. Anyone that's in the way, who's ready to support the enemy who's trying to kill your families and your community, we have no rachmanas. That's false mercy. That's a Western bava ma'aseh that they tend to only use about Jews. So I'm not saying you have to become a lemachel. I'm not saying you should become a little sheep going to slaughter. We did that once before. We ain't doing it again. Jews are not meant to be sheep to slaughter. Have backbone. Don't be spineless. We don't have to worry about the UN. We don't have to worry about the US. We don't have to worry about the EU. Le'alman Yisrael, the Jewish people are not widowers. God takes care of us. Avraham Avinu survived. Moshe survived. They didn't have the greatest armies of the world. We, Baruch Hashem, do. But don't fall into that trap of thinking that your morality and how you do war and how you do peace and how you enter, we don't look to anyone's guidance except for Torah. And the biggest mistake Israeli governments have ever made, including the current one, is to care too much about what the world has to say. Do what you have to do, and quicker is better. And anyone that's a threat to your existence, who is dancing for joy when your children are being slaughtered and butchered, they need to go too. That does not mean that we should lose our human dignity, our sensitivity, and our empathy for human suffering. And it's a hard balance. But the same God who told us to fight a war properly also told us to be sensitive, compassionate, empathetic people. And when you learn the story of the Metzora in this week's Parsha, this whole story that we just spoke about at Tsaras, it reminds us that we should never turn into the vicious haters who have zero compassion, who have zero empathy, who have zero Torah perspective. That's not who we are. So even if it's the hip thing to do, hope we bomb them and carpet bomb them and this bomb. Stop talking like a goy. Stop talking like an idolater. You're not an idolater. You're a yid. But be a yid with stolz, with a strong Jewish spine, and with incredible sensitivity for those that are suffering. That's how you make a difference in the world. May we all merit that Bezrat Hashem, Jew hatred will dissipate. Our soldiers will all come home. We lost already too many of them, but whoever's still out there in the battlefield should come home in good health and in peace. Wholesome. They're truly the heroes and heroines of Klal Yisrael. They're the people that are deserving of the greatest accolades for being the heroes of our generation, and then ultimately merit the coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu, coming of our righteous Redeemer, when there'll be a world with no suffering and no jealousy and no hatred and no war, a world of harmony, peace, and tranquility. In Heira v'yameinu, amen. Have a wonderful rest of the week. Keep that Jewish spine as strong, rock solid, with sensitivity and compassion. And if you don't have a place for the Seder, let me know. And if you're in Bozeman, you don't come to my Seder, be here or else. Have a good day, have a good week, and Afreilichem Tamid. Thank you, James. What happened?
I don't know what happened.
I just heard some background news.